What is with that music and QRs, right? Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Since I posted my first tutorial ever, many of you told me to make more, and I'm here to deliver. A bit late, but for those willing to learn, I guess it's welcome anytime. On this tutorial, you'll be learning how to create a futuristic motherboard, and of course, it's all about the looks, and as before, the textures and project files are in the description down below. Now, without further ado, let's jump into it. Select the cube, tap for Edit Mode, then delete the cube and replace it with a plane. Exit Edit Mode and set the dimensions that you see on screen, then Ctrl A, apply the scale, and modify the scale values to 0.2 on all axes. Rename the object both in the Outliner panel and in the Object Data Properties. Then rename the material and set the metallic values to 1000, color to pitch black and roughness to 0.4. After that, go towards Settings and add the HDRI from the project files down in the description, then set the strength to 0.5. Now Ctrl T and add the mapping node and set the Z rotation value to 180 degrees. We're gonna add a cube, move it to the side of the motherboard plane and scale it on Z-axis 0.2, then Ctrl A and apply the scale. Now create a new material named Random Black. Here press Shift A and search for Object Info, then search for Color Ramp and connect the random point to Factor and the ramp color to base color. Now select the white and make it dark gray. Metallic to 1000 and roughness to 0.35. Now duplicate the random black shader by adding it one more time to the list. Click the new material button and rename it to random gray and change the black color to dark gray and the second color to a lighter gray. Now we will add one more material. This one will be gold. Just change the metallic to 1000, the roughness to 0.2. As for the color, change it to a light yellow or light orange. Here we're going to duplicate the cube, then rename both objects as element 1 and element 2. Now select the motherboard and go to the Geometry Node Editor, then on the Modifier Properties, add a geometry node to the motherboard. In the editor, press Shift A and search for Point Distribute. After that, search for Attribute Randomizer and set it to Vector, and in the Attribute box, type the word Scale. In the end, search for Point Instance and in the Object option select Element 1. Add a Join Geometry node, and before you connect everything, make sure in the Point Distribute node to set the density to 0.03, and now connect all the geometry nodes. To add randomness, we're gonna add the next values to the Attribute Randomize node: 6, 1.5, and 3, and below 1, 0.5, and 0.5. Now, we will duplicate all the geometry nodes by selecting them and pressing Shift+D, add reroutes by holding Shift, then right-click and drag over the link line, and connect the group input geometry reroute to the new nodes chain. Change the seed in the duplicated point distribute, then add a join geometry and connect the both node chains to the added join geometry. Then again, connect the join geometry nodes. After that, make sure to change the attribute randomize values for the new duplicated nodes. The new values will be 1, 10, and 2. As for the max values, we will leave them the same as before. You might wonder why I set the high values on the minimum sockets and the lower values on the max sockets. Well, that's a mystery, isn't it? Now we're gonna edit the cubes. In Edit mode, click on Face Select mode or press 3 on your keyboard and select the top face, then press Ctrl B to add a slight bevel to the element. and left click when you will be satisfied with the bevel. Then again select the top face and press I to intrude the face a bit. After you finish, press again Ctrl B to slightly bevel the edge, and after that press E to extrude it upwards. Now with Edge Select mode, we're gonna select this corner only by pressing Alt, then click on the corner's edge, then again bevel it slightly by pressing Ctrl B. Here with Face Select mode, click the face from the corner, intrude it a bit, then extrude it upwards on the axis. Now, hover the cursor on the sides of the cube and press Ctrl R to add a loop cut. Now having Face Select mode on, by pressing Alt and Shift, then click, we're gonna select these faces, then assign the gold material to them, and after that, we will select only the top faces from the extruded bit and assign the random gray material. For the second element, I will add a loop cut in the middle, then on the other half, add another loop cut and bevel it until it's bigger. Now, with the middle line, by pressing double G, I will move it closer to the left side. After that, I will select all the loop cuts that I made and bevel them slightly, then delete the highlighted bevel that we just made. For this one, I will select these faces and delete, leaving only the bottom part. With Edge Select mode, and by pressing Alt and click right on the edge, it will highlight the full edge cut, and by pressing F, we will add a face to it. Repeat the same step for all the open edges. As for the bottom part, with Ctrl R I will add 4 loop cuts, then right click to remain in place. Now having the edges selected, I will press V in order to cut them apart. Now, selecting the separate faces and changing the transfer pivot to individual origins, I will scale them a bit until they will have some space between them. And extrude the face upwards to be above all the parts of the element. This face I will bevel it a bit, and for this one I will bevel the corner only. For the middle part I will bevel the top face, and for the left part I will move the top face lower. Now select all by pressing A and assign the random gray material. After that, by hovering the mouse cursor on the parts that I want, and by pressing L, I will select them and assign the random black color. The gold color will be assigned only for this bevel pin. Now we're gonna select the motherboard, go to Geometry Node Editor and select all the geometry node chains that we just made, and duplicate them, move them down, and make sure you change the seed on all the point distribute duplicates. On the point instance duplicate nodes, change the object to element 2. Now we're gonna change the values on the new attribute randomized nodes. The first node will have 0.5, 7, and 2, and the second attribute node will have 7, 0.5, and 3. Continue by connecting the group input geometry route to the new node chains, and now connect element 1 and element 2 nodes with a join geometry node and make sure that all the join geometry nodes are properly connected to the group output. Now we will add a plane, and in edit mode size it to 25 overall. Exit the edit mode and move it so the top edge will be exactly in the center of the scene. Then add an array modifier with a value 1 on y-axis. Move it in the scene on z-axis a tiny bit so it won't sit exactly on the same spot as the motherboard. Rename the plane and create a new material for the plane. Add the texture name alpha lines and connect the alpha image to the alpha socket in the principal BSDF. Press Ctrl T on the image and increase the scale values to 2 on each axis. Change the color to a darker gray and metallic to 1. Now duplicate the alpha planes again, change the position on Z-axis a tiny bit upwards, rename it as alpha dots and create a new material for it. Add an image texture and open the alpha dots image, then connect the color to emission and alpha to alpha on the principal BSDF. Again, having the image selected, press Ctrl T and change the scale values to 5 on X and Y axis. We will duplicate the plane one last time. Move it again on the axis so we'll barely pass the geometry of the elements. Rename it Alpha Planes. Create a new material for it. Add the hard surface diffuse texture. Press Shift and H in the viewport to isolate the plane from the others, so we can see on what we're working, and in the Material tab, press Ctrl T for the mapping node, and change the value to 2 on X and Y. Add a RAM color between the image and the BSDF, and play with the grayscale until you get something that you like. Here we'll add another image texture for the alpha and connect the mapping node to the image, then connect the alpha to the BSDF. And now for the normal map, add again an image texture, open the hard surface normal image, change it to non-color, then add a bump map node to it. After you finish editing the material, go to viewport and press Alt+H. To unhide everything, close the toolbars and hit render. Check it out. Now for the microchips, close the collection, create a new one called chips, add a cylinder. Check the Auto Smooth box from the normals in the Object Data Properties, then smooth it out. In the Material tab, add the random black, random gray and gold material. Then we will create a new silver material by duplicating the gold shader. For the silver material, we will set the metallic to 0.9 and color to white. Now we will create a new material for the text that you saw on the microchips. Name it Alpha Text. Add an image texture and open the chip's diffuse texture and connect it to the base color and alpha to the alpha of the BSDF. Then add the bump texture by opening the chip's bump image, set it to non-color, and after that connect it to a bump node with a strength of 0.6 and the distance to 0.2. Go into Edit mode again, select the top face and move it on Z-axis a bit. Then add a loop cut to the cylinder and by pressing G, move it closer to the top. Bevel the edge and add another loop cut in the middle of what we just beveled, then scale it inwards. After that, bevel it and add more cuts with the mouse wheel or on the keyboard, so the curve will be smooth. Select the top face and with the Intrude and Extrude option, create this shape and assign the gold material to the extruded top part. Now bevel the top edges and make them look smooth, but you can experiment with different cylinder shapes to your liking. Now in the edit mode, with face select mode, by holding Alt and then clicking the lower cylinder, press Shift plus D to duplicate it. Now with the duplicated cylinder, scale it a tiny amount so it won't clip in the main cylinder. Then, keeping the selection active, assign the alpha text material to it. Now, in UV editor, move the UV islands until it will project a different text or image until you get something that you like. Select different faces, move them around more to get variety in the capacitor text. For this project I created 3 capacitors, 5 microchips and 1 processor. I will only show you how to create 1 capacitor and 1 chip, because for the others is the same process, only the size differs. So I will speed up the process, meanwhile you can create your own and add whatever twist you like to them. Make sure to rename the capacitors and the microchips. We're gonna make the first chip by adding a cube, and in edit mode move it up until the bottom sits perfectly on 0. And as before, as materials, start by adding the random black, gray, silver and gold, followed by the alpha text shader. In edit mode, select the top face and move it on Z-axis lower to the ground, and make sure you will scale the entire shape a lot bigger in the scene. Then intrude the top face and extrude it upwards, and bevel the edges. On the lower part, bevel the edge without loop cuts added, in order to have sharp corners. And assign the random gray material. Now, with Edge Select mode active, select the corner edges with Alt and Shift, and again bevel the corners, but this time add more loop cuts, so the result will be smooth. The top face, intrude it a bit, then by pressing E, extrude it downwards and make it a bit smaller by scaling it, and assign the random gray material. Now, select the top face, duplicate it by pressing Shift plus D, and move it so it will stay on top of the main element, because we will assign the alpha text to it and we want to avoid any clipping. In the UV editor, feel free to choose a text or a number that is going to be projected on the top of your microchip. Now, to add those tiny golden pins, we will add a plane in edit mode, make it really small, and move it to the side. From there, select the edge, extrude it, and move it down, and add more corners if you want, but make sure to bevel some of them, so it will catch the light better. Assign the gold color to the pin, and you can size it further to make it smaller. Then duplicate the pins and align them so they will sit at an equal distance. After you finish a row of pins, select only those pins And after you set the transfer pivot point to 3D cursor, which by the way must be exactly in the middle of your microchip, with all the pins selected in edit mode, duplicate them and rotate them 180 degrees. I will again speed up the process because the next microchips are made using the same techniques. To finish the microchips collection, we will create another one, but this time it will be small. Again, it's made from a cube, scaled down, and I extruded, beveled, and assigned different materials to different parts of it. We're trying to achieve that small microchips clumped together in real motherboards. Using the same techniques, make sure that in the end you will have one small chip, complete with pins and all that stuff. Please make sure to rename every element that you create. For me, those made from cylinders are capacitors, and the microchips I name them simply, just chips. Create the processor by adding a cube, and in edit mode make sure that it is positioned above the center point. Then create a material named glass, and turn the transmission to 1 and transmission roughness to 0.3. But what I ended up changing in the end was the normal roughness, which now you can see that is 0.5, but you can make it 0.1 or even 0. In edit mode, we're going to duplicate the cube, then in wireframe view, press Alt and S to resize it, make it smaller inside the initial cube and assign the alpha planes to it. Now, in UV editor, unwrap the inside cube using the cube projection from Unwrap Options. Rescale the UV until you like the pattern that you see being projected on the inside of the cube. After that, duplicate the cube again and repeat the resize process, where again by pressing Alt and S we're gonna make it even smaller, and for this one duplicate the material named alpha dots, rename it to processor dots, and assign the material to the recent duplicated cube. In Material Editor, I made sure to increase the emission strength and the scale values from the mapping node. Now duplicate the top face, extrude it to make it thicker, then intrude again the top face and extrude it upwards and make it smaller by rescaling it. After that, add 4 loop cuts and move the faces that you see. Then extrude the bottom planes. For the corners, we're going to bevel them, adding more loop cuts in order for them to be round, and smooth out the element. Here, select the top faces with Face Select active, then intrude and extrude until you get a shape that you like. And make sure along the way to assign different materials until you like the result. Duplicate again the top faces, move them on Z-axis a tiny bit, and assign the alpha text material, and choose a different text for the processor in the UV unwrap. I added the gold material to the list because here we're going to add the pins to the shape. Again, by adding a simple plane in edit mode, scale it, make it smaller, move it to the side, and play with the shape until you like it. You can add more pins or less, but I urge you to try more things that you see on this tutorial. Experiment with shapes, color, and even texture imperfection for a great result in the end. Now move the microchips to the side so they won't be on our way for now. And place the processor on the motherboard that we just created. Create a new collection for the camera setup and in there add an empty and rename it Focus. Then add a camera and in the Object Properties panel increase the camera size so we can see it in the viewport. And now in the Object Constraint Properties, search the Track 2 constraint and apply it to the camera. And set a focus empty object that we just created as the target. Because the processor is the main subject, now you can move the camera everywhere but the focus will always be on the target that we just set. I also set the same focus empty as the depth of field focus, and you can play with the f-stop values until you like it. Before I work on the next steps, I turn back to some of the settings from materials and from the 3D shape and changed some values and created new small shapes because I wanted to add a bit more variety to the overall scene. Now go to the first collection and duplicate the motherboard object by pressing Shift and D and move it into the chips collection. Delete the geometry node modifier, then rename the object on the duplicated motherboard. After that, go in edit mode and subdivide it until you have roughly 8000 vertex points. Now, create a new vertex group in the Object Data Properties and rename it Chip1. And in the viewport, by selecting different vertex points, try to achieve that pattern that we see in real motherboards, of those microchips clumped together. Try to make groups of vertex points or lines that have a bit of randomness into it. After you finish selecting the points to your liking, make sure to click Assign on the Vertex Group panel, because this selection that we just made will drive the next geometry nodes. Now go back to the Geometry Nodes editor and in the Modifier panel, add a new geometry node. We will add a point separate, a transform node, an attribute field, and a point instance node. And in the object box of the point instance, search and select the smallest chip that we just made. For me, it's named Chip1. Connect all the geometry points and in the attribute field, add scale in the empty box and set the value to 1. Now, after you connected everything in the point separate node, in the mask box, type the name of the vertex group that we just made. For me, it's named Chip1. Make sure to type the exact name, otherwise it won't work. After you unhide everything, you see that the microchips that we just made, they are under some elements of the motherboard. For that, the transform geometry node comes in handy, for we will change the z values in the translation box. Now, you can go back to the microchips and change the rotation or even edit some more of the overall shape, and everything will update on the geometry node. Now, we are going back in the edit mode of the microchips mesh and create a new vertex group that will drive the second geometry node that we will add in order to add more details to the scene. For this group, I selected a few random points, for I wanted to add some capacitor to the mesh, and those are a lot less in real life compared with the other microchips that we just made. After selecting the new points, we click Assign for the new vertex group and change the name to capacitor1. Now, in the geometry node editor, we will select the node chain and duplicate it. After that, connect the group output geometry to the duplicated nodes and change the mask to capacitor1 in the point separate node. Connect the chains with a join geometry node and this one connected to the group output. We will change the object in the point instance into capacitor1, then change the scale so it will fit our scene. Now, in order to add more variety, we will select all the cylindrical capacitors and move them separately to a new collection by selecting them and then pressing M on your keyboard and clicking New Collection, then give it a name Capacitors. Because now that we have it as a collection, we can change the point instance option in the geometry node editor from object to collection, then unchecking the whole collection box. After changing a bit more the values and vertex points to have more randomness to the motherboard, I created a new microchip that's not square, and in the end I just scattered them around manually by duplicating them and changing the position of each duplicated microchip. On this step, you are free to add how many chips you want to the scene, rescale some or rotate them until you like it. Here I realized that all the cylindrical capacitor/chips had the same rotation angle, and the text on them had no randomness. That's why I went into the geometry node edit of the microchip and capacitors, and in the second node chain I added a attribute randomized node between attribute fill and point instance. And change it to vector, then type rotation as the attribute driver. And in the math settings, I set the first two values to 0, and for the next one, I added a high random value, so now each cylindrical shape will have a different rotation angle. In the compositor node I kept it simple. I added a glare set to fog glow with quality set to high and value 2 in the threshold box. And after that I added a lens distortion with distort set to -0.01 and dispersion set to 0.02. And here we are. I'm not glad that the tutorial ended up having almost 40 minutes long, but I admit that I tried to bite more than I could chew. I had to cut a lot of what I recorded, or the video length had to be over an hour. But for those who liked the result and had the patience to watch and try it till the end, hats off to you all legends. With these last words, we came again to an end. Thank you for watching and stay awesome. See ya.